Welcome. In this video, we are going to discuss some key pieces about vocabulary. We'll talk about some key research on why vocabulary is so critical. You will also have an opportunity to learn about Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 vocabulary words and consider why this might be important to determining what vocabulary to teach to your students. And the last thing we will look at is how to determine which vocabulary to teach. We can't teach every word, so there are some key things that will help us think about what is most critical. Here are a few fun facts. Research says that vocabulary is the best predictor of academic success. In many ways, this makes sense, as we think about how vocabulary is often related to students' background knowledge or prior knowledge. Some more research is about the vocabulary gap that exists. From students coming from low socioeconomic status, at age 6, they have internalized about 2,000 words. This is compared to students coming from a middle socioeconomic status who have internalized about 4,000 words, and is different than students from high socioeconomic status who have internalized about 6,000 words. Looking at this research, you can see how critical it is that we help students make up this gap. Research has shown that in first and second grade, children would need to learn about 800 words per year to keep up with the amount of vocabulary they should know at their age. This would turn out to be about 2 new words per day. From third grade on, children would need to learn about 2,000 to 3,000 new words each year. This is about 6 to 8 per day. Clearly, this helps us see how critical vocabulary is and how we need to be aware of what vocabulary our students need to know. A researcher named Dr. Marzano has really looked into the impact of vocabulary on students. If you don't know much about Dr. Marzano, he has over 35 years experience in education, has worked all over the country and across the world, and he's really into looking at how to translate research into practice for teachers and students. His researchers and him have come up with a list of vocabulary words that they suggest are critical for students by grade level and content area. Take a moment now and look at this Excel list that is in World Class under Session 3. Really hone in on the grade level or grade levels that you spend the most time with. Once you have perused this list, pull out your online reflection agenda and answer these questions. How might you see yourself using this list during the school year? And how might you teach these words in a systematic, meaningful way to students? Pause the screencast now to think through this learning. Another piece that helps us think about what are the critical vocabulary words we want to teach students is this idea of 3 tiers of vocabulary. It can be broken down into Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 words. Tier 1 words are the basic words that students know. They rarely require instructional attention, and you might think of them more as high-frequency words or just basic vocabulary that students are picking up in their life. Tier 2 words are also high frequency, but they can be used across a variety of domains. There are some examples here. I think another example would be the word table. Think about the different ways table is used in varying contexts. For example, if I'm talking about a table that I eat on, that is very different than a scientific table, which is also different than a table I might use in a math class to record my thinking. The best way to think about Tier 2 words are words that have multiple meanings or can be found across a variety of knowledge domains. Finally, you have Tier 3 words. They are of lower frequency, and they are usually limited to specific content areas. There are some examples here, like isotope, peninsula, refinery. Typically, they are learned best as students are learning that content-specific vocabulary in their specific content areas. We're going to look at a few examples of text and see if we can determine what are the Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 words in these texts. Here's an example of just an excerpt from an adaptation of the story The Little Red Hen. I'm going to read it to you now, and then we're just going to take a look at a few examples of the tiers. The little red hen had eaten the last slice of her tasty loaf of bread. She sipped a cup of chickweed tea and had taken her nap. Now she was hungry again, so she scratched through her cupboard and spied a can of tomato sauce. "Why don't I make a lovely little pizza?" she said to herself. Take a look at the arrow. The word little, what do you think the tier would be for the word little? Tier 1, Tier 2, or Tier 3? Little is most likely a Tier 1 word. It's very high frequency, and students can learn the meaning of this word in everyday interaction. Slice. Take a moment and think about this word. Do you believe it's Tier 1, Tier 2, or Tier 3? Slice would be a Tier 2 word. Think about the different contexts you might use slice in. I can slice some bread. I can also divide things by slices. There are other uses of slice as well in different contexts. Finally, cupboard. Cupboard is most likely a Tier 3 word. It's more specific to the context at hand. Take a moment now to pause the screencast again. On your reflection guide for the online class, you will see a graphic organizer that is asking you to identify some Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 words in this text. I've already given you an example of 3. See if you can find at least one more Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 word in this example. Pause now to think through this learning. Let's look at another example. This is from a middle school science textbook. I will read it to you in case the wording is too small. A solar system has a star or a sun at its center, with planets orbiting around it. Our solar system has 9 planets spinning around the sun. 7 of these have 1 or more moons orbiting them. You can see most of the planets shining in the night sky. Large pieces of rock, called asteroids, and frozen balls of ice, called comets, also orbit the sun. Gas and dust. Our solar system was born when the sun formed from a cloud of glass. The sun formed deep inside the dusty cloud. A disk of gas and dust swirled around the infant sun. Bits of dust stuck together to form large pieces of rock. The rocks bumped and stuck together to form huge rocky masses. And over millions of years, these masses combined to form planets. Take a moment now and look at this example. Go back to your online reflection guide for our neighbors and determine a few Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 words that you see in this text example. Pause this screencast while you do this learning. Before reading this article, take a look at the question at the top on the right. This is the same question you should see on your online reflection guide. Why do you think it's critical to understand the tiers of vocabulary? How might this impact your teaching and instruction? Take a few moments now thinking of the exercises you just did and reflect on this question. Pause the screencast. When you're finished, come right back. Now that we've determined Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 words, and also thought about what Marzano's research has said about what vocabulary to teach, we are going to read one final article called Choosing What Vocabulary to Teach. This is a short article that discusses some really critical key points in thinking about how do we narrow down what it is we want students to learn? Take a moment now and download this article off of World Class. After reading the article, answer these two questions, Part A and Part B, which are on the graphic organizer for your online class reflection guide. Think about, how do you think the tiers of vocabulary connect with the suggestions in the article deciding what to teach? Part B, choose one word from the two texts we have just looked at, either the red hen text or the space text. And think about, which one would you take time to teach? What word would you take time to teach? And then explain why based on the key points of the article. So again, pause the screencast, read the short article on deciding what to teach, and reflect on these two questions. Now let's take an opportunity to apply everything we've learned. Go back to your vocabulary lesson. You've probably already determined the vocabulary that students will need to understand the text, as well as any possible additional vocabulary they would need to respond, meaning what they would need to show that they understood what your learning objective was. If you have lots and lots of words, take some time now to narrow your vocabulary based on the articles and exercises we just did.